Hello again, and this is video number 4 on the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. This section will cover chapters 19 through 32, the entire section regarding the Duke and the Dauphin and Huck's interactions with them. This section presents many problems in terms of analysis. This section was not originally in the manuscript for Huckleberry Finn. Twain added it later. And it's problematic in that if we're looking at it from a pure hero's journey standpoint, this is where things deviate and become complicated and very, very messy, to put it colloquially, to put it simply. So what I'm going to attempt to do is start weaving together all of our areas of analysis. So we have the hero's journey, we have poverty, we have identity, and we have freedom as the 4 things we're tracking through the novel. And so now I'm gonna link the hero's journey with each of the other 3 motifs in order to further analyze this and show you just how complicated this section in particular, but really the rest of the novel, makes for analysis. So let's start with poverty. Again, we're not talking about actual physical and monetary poverty. We're talking about poverty mindset and the cycle of poverty that Huck is struggling with, right? And towards the beginning of the section, in chapter 23, Huck talks about how kings are rapscallions, right? When it's revealed that these 2 no-good-nicks that they've encountered, when one claims to be, the Duke of Bilgewater, and the other one claims to be the son of the former king, despite the fact that he would have to be several hundred years old for that to be true. But while Huck is talking to Jim in chapter 23, there's talk about how all kings are rapscallions, how you can't trust any of them. They're only out for themselves, right? So this disdain for upper classes and even authority that is prevalent in the cycle of poverty. In terms of the hero's journey with poverty, right? So we're looking at potentially 3 to 4 different sections of the hero's journey at this point. And the first one we need to encounter is crisis. Crisis in terms of poverty would be Huck seeing the Duke and the King, or the Dauphin, cheating the family of the man who died out of their money. And this is the crisis because this is a potential way for Huck to get out of this cycle of poverty, right? He has to make a choice. He has to decide if, he is going to stick with these 2 guys, help them with their plot, and potentially make a whole lot of money. 6,000 gold coins, a lot of money. Or is he going to deny all that, and go on a more righteous path? And of course, he chooses the more righteous path, right? He decides to tell Mary Jane, or Mary Beth, or whatever the girl's name is, about their plan and about what they do. So that would be close to the crisis, or the crisis moment. Then we have treasure and result. And treasure is sometimes called apotheosis because Huck doesn't get any physical treasure at any point in this novel. He already has it, right? And he leaves that behind. So instead of a physical treasure or some sort of magical item like you would get in a in a old tale. There's the apotheosis, which is a greater understanding of how the world works and one's place in it. And in terms of poverty, that comes close to the end of this section when Huck realizes, he's escaped the Duke and the King one more time after they escape the town. The Duke and the King come back, get back on the raft. Huck is trapped with them again with Jim. Huck escapes from them when they're arguing at the tavern and discovers that they've sold Jim for the reward money. So his apotheosis at that point, his treasure, is realizing that Jim is just as worthy of happiness and freedom as Huck is. And this is the apotheosis because throughout the novel, Huck has been struggling with this idea of, well, what I need to tell somebody, I need to tell the truth. I'm so offended that, I'm shocked to hear that he would run away and try to steal his wife and kids out of slavery. That's not the way it's done, right? A very poverty mindset, this is the way it's always been done. There's no change. That's the problem with cycles, is they keep rotating, right? This is the way it's always done. Why would we change that? And his moment of apotheosis is him realizing that Huck has been, the father that his own pap had never been. And so he does want equality and even better things for Jim and breaks that cycle of poverty, right? And so his result at that point is deciding to go break Jim out of where he's held and help him to freedom. So hero's journey in terms of poverty, it's the weakest of the three. Let's talk about identity. And here is why you're going to see it's a different set of treasure, a different set of crisis, treasure, and result when we talk about identity. So the crisis comes in terms of identity on pages 159 to 60, which is in this book, I think. Sorry for the delay. Chapter 26. And the crisis here is that Huck feels absolutely terrible that he's helping the Duke and Dauphin rob these poor women of their inheritance. He's had to lie to the youngest daughter about who he is. He almost gets caught. He has to keep up all of these appearances. And it doesn't feel good. His search for identity, his willingness to assume other identities hits the lowest point right here. So that's the crisis. That's the lowest moment. He has no idea who he is. He knows that pretending to be something that he is not, especially in terms of personal gain, is the lowest you can go. And that's how he feels at that point. His treasure then comes just 10 pages later in chapter 28, when he finally decides that he is going to tell Mary Jane the truth, right? He says, I reckon a body that ups and tells the truth when he is in a tight place is taking considerable many risks, though I ain't had no experience and can't say for certain. But it looks so to me anyway, and yet here's a case where I'm blessed if it don't look to me like the truth is better and actually safer than a lie. I must lay it by in my mind and think it over some time or another. It's so kind of strange and unregular. This is his treasure. This is his greater understanding of the universe, is that Telling the truth is better. Being true to yourself is the true key to identity, right? Trying on all these things is great and it will inform your identity. But true identity is being truthful, right? If you are pretending to be something you're not, and it hits a point where you have to lie to people about things that happen or things that you think, or lie to people about anything, that is not true identity. Then you are an imposter. And you're no better than the Duke and the King trying to, swindle these women out of their inheritance, right? And I'm not talking about if you're just trying to, cheat people out of something. Lying for the sake of lying is just as much a swindle and a disservice as lying to somebody in order to gain something, right? So this is the treasure. This is his apotheosis moment, which is different than it was for poverty, right? And then at this point, he has a vision of his result on the very next page where he tells Mary Jane the truth. He's able to get rid of the Duke and the King, have them jailed, and he and Jim can escape. But that's not what happens, right? It gets to the point he sends Mary Jane off. Everything is clicking along wonderfully, and then two men who also claim to be the dead man's brothers show up, and there's they go to the tavern, and the lawyer gets them apart in the handwriting things, right? So the result in terms of identity, that moment where he makes his escape, who knows? Maybe it's that same moment as with poverty when he decides that he is going to help Jim, right? He doesn't need to put on this persona of law-abiding southern man who believes that slavery is wrong or that slavery is fine, that it's the way it's always been, and he needs to abide by that because he's about to do that. He writes the letter to the widow and to Aunt Polly about where Jim is, right? He's got it by him. He's ready to send it, and then he has his moment of change that ends with him saying, well, I guess I'll go to hell then, and he decides to help Jim. So maybe this is the result. Maybe this is his transformation or atonement, which are other terms for this stage in the hero's journey. 8 o'clock, by the way, 6, 7, 8 we're talking about here, right? But it doesn't really involve any kind of magic flight. He's not escaping from anything except for maybe a mindset of poverty, or not poverty, of slavery, right? So identity in this section is complicated, and this is especially complicated because at this point, he should fully embrace being himself, telling the truth, using some of the skills he learned about, being able to adapt to situations, but still remaining himself. But after this point, he already in this section pretends to be someone who he's not, right? He claims that Jim is his property in order to try to get him back. Later in the next section, we'll see that he impersonates Huck Finn, right? Or not Huck Finn. Huck Finn impersonates Tom Sawyer through the entire next section. So Hero's journey in terms of identity crashes and burns at this point, right? We get to 8 o'clock and that's where it stops. Because there's no return, denouement, and then a reestablishing of Huck in his new world as this person who understands, that telling the truth and being himself is the best way to keep yourself out of trouble. It just doesn't happen for him, right? Let's talk about freedom. What is the crisis for freedom? The crisis for freedom is probably when that second set of Dead Man's Brothers show up, right? This is page 1 when the other gentlemen show up, right? And here is the low part, the part where he's pretty sure he's hit rock bottom at this point, right? Because the Duke and the King can't talk their way out of it. Huck definitely can't talk his way out of it. He lies again, saying that he saw the slaves walking in and out of the Duke and the King's room to all of these people, right? So this is his low moment. Huck thinks that all hope is lost. And what I talked about before on page 184 of this book, there's a noticeable change in the way that Huck now narrates his surroundings and narrates the story. And it's very obvious, and it's very intentional by Twain to kind of show, to produce imagery that confines and holds you more, right? If we think about, the bottom of the pit, 6 o'clock, this thing that we think deep, dark, awful moment, right? So you look at his description here. Well, we swarmed along down the river road, just carrying on like wildcats. And to make it more scary, the sky was darkening up, the lightning beginning to wink and flitter, and the wind to shiver amongst the leaves. This was the most awful trouble and most dangerous I ever was in, and I was stunned. Everything was going so different from what I had allowed for. Right? So previous descriptions of nature, even the storms, think back to the storm in chapter 6 or 7 or 8, when he and Jim are on the island, and Jim says, "Oh, it's going to rain. There's going to be a storm. We better get stuff off of your canoe," right? That description about the storm is wonderful, and it's just as, grand in scale as this one is, but the tone has shifted, right? It's not a fun adventure that they're going on and they're just embarking on it as before. Now it's deep and dark and scary. So the description of these things, we want to look for parallelism when we're looking to to analyze. The parallelism here is that the storms are equal, but the descriptions are opposite, right? So this shows that he's down in a dark, dark place. So in terms of freedom, he has a magical flight that second time he gets away. He thinks he gets it the first time, right? We could even make the... we have to do apotheosis first. So his treasure at that point is him finding that avenue for escape, right? He understands that staying with the Duke and the King, which he kind of realized before, but so much more now, staying with them is going to do him no good, and him and Jim no good. So he escapes, right? Here's his magic flight, and he has 2 of them. The first one is when they find the money in the dead man's coffin, and he's able to book out and head back to Raft. But of course, at the end of the chapter, the Duke and the King show up, get on the raft, and make Huck feel even worse. So he has one magical flight, but then he gets another one. Further complication to why there are problems with this story. But then he gets to do it again in the very next chapter. He flees, and that's when he finds Jim is missing, right? So I think what I'm trying to say at this point is in order to do analysis, we need to start merging these different motifs and elements, right? The hero's journey is never clean unless it's an ancient old story, right? Where simple storytelling was the best way. Here's what, here are the steps. And if you do a search for the hero's journey and do an image search, you're going to get a whole bunch of different circles that kind of resemble each other but are slightly different in different ways. So the hero's journey is complicated, and then it's further complicated when you have a story that should be kind of following the narrative, but then just scatters at a certain point, right? And this is a problem with with this novel. This is where analysis gets tricky because it doesn't seem to have a coherent message from here on out, right? I talked about the problems which with all three of the motifs, poverty, of identity, and of freedom at this point, in that, you had up before the Duke and the King, you could have followed the hero's journey where they are now going into, they've gone too far. They're in Southern territory. They're in Arkansas, and they got to figure out how to go back. And that could be a clean hero's journey right there. But that's not what happens. We get this complication with the Duke and the King, and then we get it later with having to rescue Jim from out of potentially getting sent back to Aunt Polly, right? So in terms of poverty, it just kind of gets dropped here, except for Huck's change in attitude towards slavery. And even that is complicated in that when we get to Jim's rescue, Twain instead uses a deus ex machina to make everything right in terms of, poverty and slavery at that point. Identity, Huck has his apotheosis. He has his moment of reckoning. He even makes his escape, but then he goes right back to it. It's like we swing way back over to 4 o'clock, and we're going to just kind of, it's like the clock broke, and we're just going to kind of swing at the bottom of the clock. There's no, okay, now I'm going to use this new knowledge I have. I'm going to escape trouble. I'm going to make life better for Jim. I'm going to make life better for myself. And here's my new status quo. That doesn't happen either. And then we look at freedom, and that's probably the easiest one to further analyze because eventually Huck and Jim do get their freedom, but it's going to be messy again, and there's no clean narrative or no clear analysis when we get to that point. But we'll do our best. So there'll be one more video where we talk about the remainder of the book, which is breaking Jim out of jail. I hope these are helping. Have a lovely day. I will see you again soon.